Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, or good morning, right? So, welcome to Security Squawk Podcast. My name is Bryan Hornung. Today, I have with me my co-host Reginald Andre from Mark Solvers and Randy Bryan from Tech Rescue. How are you, gentlemen?
Doing well. Good morning.
Good.
Doing great. Great to be here.
All right, so this is the podcast where we talk about the business of cybersecurity. It's not a tech podcast, although we do jump into a little bit of tech. We try to break it down to a level that everybody can understand. We all have a goal of educating people about cybersecurity, and that's what we do on this podcast. So there's only one fee for this podcast, and you got to pay the fee, right? If you learn something, if you're educated in any way, please share our show. It's how we grow this organically. We don't ever intend to run ads on this or anything like that. So please share the show and help us out. So, gentlemen, how are you today? How's it going, Randy?
Man, going pretty good. A little overcast today, which always makes my allergies pop up a little bit. Apparently, everything in the air is bad today, like cedar, stuff like that. But anyway, down here, deep in the heart of Texas, everything's going great.
Good. How you doing, Andre?
I'm doing well. 82 degrees, sunny outside, and can't wait to see you guys or see Randy in Austin tomorrow.
Totally jelly. Totally jelly. Not that you're going to Austin, that you have such nice weather where you live.
Got it.
All right. So today on the show, we're going to talk about some interesting stuff that we're seeing around social engineering for cybersecurity. So the cyber attackers are getting, I'm not going to call it desperate, but it's not as easy for them to hit cyber attacks and successfully launch cyber attacks. And I know it's crazy for me to say that because it seems like they're happening all the time, which they are. But the ways that they're going about getting into people's systems is evolving, and it's evolving every day. And we're gonna highlight that and talk about the different ways that we're seeing cyber criminals use things like social engineering to trick people into installing malware onto their networks. The next one we're going to talk about is some interesting new data out of the cyber insurance world and the insurance industry. As we know, cyber insurers are kind of stepping up their game in terms of how they're offering their products, how they're selling the insurance, and quite frankly, dictating to our industry how we should be doing things. So I think we need to educate people on what's going on in the cyber insurance world, because I think for a long time, businesses have relied on cyber insurance as that kind of fail safe, that if everything else goes wrong, especially with a cyber attack, that this cyber insurance is going to help me out and step in. And we're going to talk about if that is actually the case. And then the last one is that REvil's now gone again. The prolific ransomware group that has hacked many businesses, made many, many millions of dollars. Russian-based REvil ransomware group is offline yet again. So we're going to talk about why they're offline, how they went offline, why they went offline, and kind of what's next for this group and other ransomware groups. So that's what we got lined up for today. And let's just jump right into it. I'm going to share my screen out here in a second. And the first one we're going to talk about, fellas, is this the Fin7, right? Which is basically a name by cybersecurity researchers that we give kind of these different groups, especially when they're state sponsored. They kind of name these groups various names to kind of identify them. So as they're doing research and comparing notes and seeing who's working with who, you kind of outline like who these groups are, and they kind of give them these different names based on they do stand for something. It's basically how they like to operate and how they like to attack, and they give these groups these names. So Randy, what's going on here? Like what it's saying, Fin7 lures unwitting security pros to carry out ransomware attacks. Now, can security pros really be tricked into carrying out ransomware attacks like this?
Yes. So basically, they have set up a fake security company called Bastion Secure, which is a which is penetration testing, which is basically where you hire an outside firm to test your defenses. Like you can do it for your website, you can do it for your company network, for your employees. Basically, test how the defenses are working and if you're prepared. And basically, so they set up this firm called Bastion Secure, and then they've been hiring pen testing professionals to come work for them, thinking they're going to work for a legit company, and then using those people to then basically pen test companies, but at the same time to get into those companies and basically do their thing. These guys are really good at getting in networks and staying in there a long time undetected. So this is quite genius. Also, it's a little bit disturbing. It's just shows the importance of really vetting the vendors that you use for the things that you do.
Yeah, I agree. Andre, what do you got to say about this?
Yeah, so it is really genius because you basically are hiring someone who more than likely is what is called an ethical hacker. And you're now saying, hey, you're being hired. We contracted with this company, and we want you to find all the vulnerabilities that this server has, this network has, or whatever, and then let us know if you're able to get in, how you were able to get in, and then from there, we'll take it from there. We'll let our client know. So they're basically using these guys to do that. And it's actually, I believe the article said they're paying these people anywhere from $800 to $1,200 a month US, which is pretty inexpensive if you compared the hacker to hiring someone else where they're going to have to pay a percentage of the ransomware. So they're actually getting a deal by doing it this way.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess one of the things is it's like it is disturbing that an IT company would be tricked in this manner, but it's a serious thing, right? And so let's just straight up what are some things that you guys would recommend that these companies let's just talk to the IT companies first, right? That's who I want to address, and then we'll talk about other businesses. So Randy kind of alluded to it a little bit when he talked about it, but what are some things that IT companies should be doing in order to not get tricked in this manner? Like, I know Randy came right out and said it is like vet who you're working with. So how can we vet who we're working with? I need a tool. Right. I was told by, Randy, if you came to me and said, hey, what are you using for pen test? And I was like, hey, this company over here was great. And I had no idea they installed malware on my system. They were just really good to work with. And now by word of mouth, I've given you their trust. So what are some things that we can do as IT providers to make sure that we don't fall into this? And, obviously, like one thing I would say right off the bat, kind of where my head's going is don't go Googling for a tool that you need in an IT services businesses and then go download that tool, right? That seems kind of obvious, but I think it needs to be said because I think that's, sometimes common isn't always common, right? So we need to kind of point that out. So what are some thoughts that you have around this in terms of, what companies can do to make sure that this doesn't happen to them?
Yikes. So you can look and see how long a pen testing or security company has been around. You can look at their reputation in the MSP community. And this sounds kind of sad or whatever, or it's not, I don't know. Bottom line is, I think you also got to trust your gut. And if you get a real uneasy feeling, like I've been on dozens and dozens of calls with CEOs and or CIOs, CTOs of some of these companies that are relatively new, like in the last few years. And honestly, a few times I've just gotten a bad feeling about it all. And, you can't go by your feelings all the time. You feel great about something doesn't mean that it's good, but you've got to be safe, man. And you got to have your ears up, and you've got to be watching for issues. At the end of the day, look for somebody that's established, that has a well-established reputation. That's what I would say off the top of my head.
Andre?
No, likewise. If any tool that you're going to be using, you have to ask your colleagues in the field, what are you using? If you belong to any type of Facebook groups, Reddit groups, or anything like that, definitely put that. But like Bryan, like you said, don't just Google whatever tool or whatever problem that you have and just assume that whatever shows up on the website is true. I've seen that many times with applications, even as simple as Microsoft Office, where someone can download Microsoft Office thinking it's going to take them to that website. And then it's a different, it looks like the Office and it has a, click here to download, but it's really malware. Or if you're looking for CRM software, a lot of times you'll find some companies say the top 10 best CRM softwares, and they list the different ones, and then in there are stuff that are not good.
And those are good points, and I think we have covered the obvious attacks, right? But when you go and you read a story like this, and they go as far as saying that they're setting up a legitimate company, right? That they're setting up legitimate companies here for carrying out this type of an attack. What can somebody do if they look like Rainey mentioned certifications, right? Or you some kind of credential, right? Is that what you said, Randy? So you mentioned credentials or certifications. So what are some certifications that companies should be looking for if they're going to do something like this? But I'm just thinking around the large spectrum. Let's go outside of the IT world, right? IT people should definitely be not working with companies that are kind of, fly by night. Nobody's ever heard of them. You don't know the business owner. They haven't been in the industry. I mean, a lot of the companies that we work with now, the guys that are running those companies have been in this industry for a very long time. We know who they are. We know, you know what I mean? At least the ones I'm thinking of, they've been around a while. I know them. A lot of times I have them in my cell phone. I have their cell phone numbers. And we just know the community and we know who's involved. And if a company from the outside tried to come in and sell me on their service, I would, number one, just be highly skeptical because I don't know them. I've never heard of them. Is that kind of like a methodology that we could apply to all businesses, in your opinion? Like if you've never heard of this company before and they kind of come out of nowhere and they're all of a sudden on your radar selling you or your business or your industry some sort of service. I mean, I'm just taking this a step further and going like, it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility that these guys start buying booths at conferences and start like really looking like a legitimate IT company. But at the end of the day, there's some underlying nefarious thing that they're up to. And I think that's why we need to talk about this and why we need to bring this to awareness to people. And if you think we're talking crazy here, Threat Post thought it was important enough to write an article on it. And I think it's something that people need to have an awareness around. We're probably a year or two ahead of like seeing this in full force, but this is the kind of stuff that we're seeing being talked about, like in places like the dark web, where these guys are plotting and planning to set up companies like this that look legitimate as hell. And if you don't think they'll go as far as getting booths at conferences, you're sorely mistaken, because they will.
I've thought of 3 points. You asked originally, is this going to also apply to anybody we do business with? And one of the main features or ideas behind zero trust is that you assume that the bad actors are already in your stuff. So I think when you're dealing with a potential business partner, a potential vendor, somebody that's called your company looking for help, somebody that's called asking for a quote on something. Like, you need to treat it like, you be respectful and, give them information, but also in the back of your mind, treat it like this is potentially a bad actor, and you don't want to give them information, like they're like, hey, today's my birthday. Then you just blurt out, what your birthday is. And now they know that. I know that's a pretty small example, but that's the whole idea. One of the whole ideas behind Zero Trust, you act like those people are already in your stuff. And so you need to set up what you do accordingly. A couple other things I thought about is when you're vetting a company, you need to find out what their security practices are, keeping in mind that the SolarWinds hack was literally like this much code was the original backdoor, and a programmer could have got up to go outside to smoke a cigarette, and they were already in their system, and boom, put that code in there. And that there needs to be a code review. And I don't want to get off into the weeds here, but a company needs to have practices in place to prevent that. If they're just like, you're on a call with 1,000 other people and they're making 1 million changes on the fly, man, that scares the crap out of me when I see that. And I have seen that with some popular vendors in our industry. And then the final point it made me think of was the laws related to this need to be criminal and not civil. What I mean by that, just fining them $5 million for setting up a fake security company if they get caught, right, and getting to go to a white collar jail, where they have gym memberships and this and that. Like, we can't treat it like that, because this is what you said. What you said made me think of this. This is nefarious. This is really bad if you're going to pretend to be a security company, but you're actually trying to get people's information and basically hack them. So I think the laws need to have more teeth.
Yeah, I mean, and the reality of it is we're getting attacked from all different angles in terms, like business, just in general, not just this industry or anything like that. And like what you just mentioned there, Randy, with like vetting the code, right, or vetting the company and how they produce the software is a great idea. But here's the problem. Here's kind of like the major challenge that businesses need to have awareness, and people need to have awareness around the state of our world and our cybersecurity and our IT industry. Over the weekend, it was disclosed that there's some code base, some library where you can go out and download a JS library, and this JS library, you can integrate it into your web applications. And what that does is it allows the person running that website to capture the browser version and all kinds of information about the browser and the visitor. And this is freely open code that you can download and incorporate into your web application. And I have a lot of feelings about this, because number one, the code in the library was exploited, and now anybody who's downloaded this code, and I think the last like 3 or 4 months, and implemented it on their sites, now their server is basically infected with malware. The other interesting point is that there's 7 million of these downloaded weekly. So there's 7 million developers are downloading this code base 7 million times a week. And I happened to go on Twitter and kind of blast the community when I saw this, and kind of said, it's not that hard. I'm a programmer. I used to, back in the day, I did web development for the United States Navy. I built a lot of really cool web programs for them. I know how to program in the web in my sleep. To write code base to determine information from a browser is not that difficult to do, to the tune to where we have 7 million developers a week downloading this because they're too lazy to write their own code for this. And I understand the argument that we don't have infinite time, but you need to have infinite time to make sure that your code base is secure. So if you're downloading it from a third-party site or somebody else is writing your code, you better be vetting that code before you put it in your own application. And that's what I'm talking about on Twitter when people blasted me for suggesting that I was asking developers to step up their game a little bit, because that's ridiculous that you're downloading code base on the internet and then using it in production, and without doing any proper vetting in between. But that's the world we live in. And this is happening across the board with major products, with major websites around the world that you would probably believe are secure. And I'm telling you, that's what they're doing. They're doing exactly what I just laid out for you. They have developers who are not being checked. There's no process for checking what they're doing if their code base is secure. And here you go, where you probably have close to 50 to 100 million web servers that are infected right now because of this code base. What do you guys think about that?
I mean, it's disturbing.
Yeah, you heard about it, right? You knew.
Yeah, I did. I read about it this weekend, and it made me start thinking about, so like in Linux, there's, I don't know the exact number, hundreds of thousands of similar type code base libraries that you can bring in.
Right.
And I guess gone are the days that you can just write something and just put it up there and just have everybody use it. We're going to have more vetting on all of this stuff.
Right. And I've been a big proponent of that for a long time. I think places like GitHub are a problem if they're not being managed correctly. Right. So, it's just a huge, huge problem for me that this is how we're doing things. I have no issue with libraries. I have no issue with people streamlining their work. But if you're going to download a code base and use it in your application from an external source, especially if it's internet accessible and people are collaborating on that from all over the place, you need to have a process in place for checking that and making sure. And you at least have to be doing a code review to make sure that you understand what every line of code in that application that you just downloaded is doing, right? Because you're going to see these calls, these weird things that shouldn't be there when you're just looking for browser information. You know what I'm saying, Randy?
Mm-hmm.
So, Andre, got anything to add to this?
No, I don't do programming too much. I definitely understand what you guys are saying, but no, nothing to add on this.
Let's look at this from outside of that perspective, though, right?
Sure.
Before we move on, because you haven't said much here, and I want to hear your thoughts around this from a purely business standpoint. Like, we might have just scared the crap out of a lot of people by talking the way we're talking. What can a business do, right? We're talking about what IT companies can do, but what can a business actually do to protect themselves here?
Well, let me ask you a question. Is this mostly where it's an outside US? Like, should we only be hiring code developers that are in the US because the chances of them being corrupt is a little less, or it doesn't matter?
I don't think it matters.
Wow.
I don't think it matters. Money talks.
Uh-huh.
It doesn't matter where you are. And it's not to say that there aren't some cyber criminals operating within the borders of the U.S., right? They just haven't gotten caught. Right. The only difference between a cyber criminal sitting within the borders of the U.S. and outside of the U.S. is you're probably going to get caught if you're inside the borders of the U.S. Like, you might not get caught today, but you will get caught eventually. Not the case if you're outside of the U.S., and that's why we see so many significant attacks coming from outside the U.S., because we have no jurisdiction to do anything like we do if you're inside the borders of the U.S. So I don't think that has much of anything to do with it, but I do think think businesses need to have an awareness of, like, don't download stuff off the internet that's free, or don't go to websites and download plugins and tools. Like I think the biggest thing that I think of when it comes to a regular business is, like, the people who want to download that plugin for Excel or PowerPoint or Word because they think it's going to help them do something bigger, better, or faster. Right. And then, you have to allow a certain level of permissions for these plugins to run a lot of times. And those are the kinds of permissions that hackers love.
Mhm.
Right. So I'm thinking about the more common things that I see people do within their computer systems and their networks. And that is a big thing that comes to mind for me is like, even if it's paid or free, if it's an Outlook plugin, if it's a PowerPoint plugin, an Excel plugin, or a plugin for any application that you might use in your business, you really need to make sure that that's a reputable company that you're buying and purchasing from, that you know of them. And if you don't, you need to start asking the kind of questions we were talking about today. If you don't know that company, if it's not something that's recognizable to you, you really got to question whether or not you should be downloading that or not. And that's a big deal because people don't do that at all, in my opinion. So that's kind of like the world we're moving towards, is like people need to be more vigilant about what they download, what they install on their computer.
And I think that's too important when you come up to the apps, like, how you have the Google Play Store and how there's a big issue with that. And I don't know about iPhones if they have that issue, but I know definitely with the Android department, that's a big thing going on now.
Right. And that's a lot of the argument that I hear Apple users make a lot of times is like, we're willing to pay because they feel like they're more secure. I've heard people say that to me, more like, why would, Apples are just more expensive. Well, they're more expensive because I don't know if I feel this way. I can empathize with the thought process, but I've had Apple users tell me that they pay, more for iPhones and Apple products because they believe that they get a level of security over maybe what you get with Android, and they're willing to pay more for that. Do you guys agree with that?
It's a myth. So
I agree.
It's not, if you're comparing iPhones to like some ZTE, sorry to, drag ZTE, but they've got a bad reputation. My son had one that we think it came infected from the factory. I don't know. Like I said, I'm not trying to drag them, but if it's some kind of Android phone that's made one time, never puts out an update, okay, yeah, iPhones are more secure than that. But when you put iPhone up against a Samsung phone that's getting regular updates, or my new security favorite, the Pixel, which gives updates for 5 years, you're not talking, it's a guarantee. I would say as a water level, this is what I tell people, the water level's higher in general for iPhones than Androids. But when you compare it with an update Android phones get updates faster, and there's more emphasis, I believe, on security. I really lost a lot of faith in Apple with these 3.0 days. They just patched back, I think it was the beginning of this month or towards the end of last month. And then, and I'm a Mac user. I use a Mac as my main computer. And I don't think that it's necessarily more secure. I tell people it's like being behind a small wall in a war. You know what I mean? Like, no one thinks to aim everything over there at that little bitty wall that you're hiding behind, and you think you're secure because no one's shooting your way. Well, they're only like 6% of all computers, or 7, or whatever it is. But basically, they're a target. They're a small target, so they don't get as much. But they're a computer. They're still hackable. So you got me started. But bottom line is, they're good products, but don't just assume that they're automatically secure. You still got to be responsible.
Love it. If I was allowed to play Rolling Stones music right now, I'd totally play it, Andy. So, all right. So let's move on, and I'm gonna bounce off Randy or Andre on this one, because you kind of said some things in the green room about this article that I thought were really interesting, and I want to go right into that. So this is actually an insurance industry article. This is not a tech industry article. And funny enough, as I mentioned to you guys in the green room 6 months ago, I had what maybe some would consider, he would definitely consider himself a authority on cyber insurance. I had suggested that what we're about to talk about was actually happening. And, I saw this going on well over 6 months ago. But I haven't really had any hardcore evidence or anything to point to other than my own experience, which a lot of times I'm under NDA and I can't share the details. But this has been going on for some time, and I think businesses need to be aware about it, because I talk to a lot of business owners, and a lot of business owners think that because they have cyber insurance or some kind of insurance, that no matter what happens, they're going to be okay. And we're seeing some interesting stuff in this article. And there's actually two things that you mentioned, Andre, that I told this person, more than 6 months ago. And they basically questioned me on where I got that information from. Like, I read it somewhere, and I didn't read it somewhere. I was just sharing my own experiences, basically saying that, I've seen businesses be their ransomware claim or their payment for ransomware be denied, or I've seen it where they've paid it and then the insurance company sues because they say, we shouldn't have paid you because, X, Y, and Z. And I was questioned on that. And now here we go. We have a claimsjournal.com, which is an insurance industry publication, basically saying what I said 6 or 7 months ago to this industry expert. So, Andre, what are they talking about here? What am I talking about? And let's get into it.
Yep. So you have a company called Board Riders. They're based in California. They do surfboards and a lot of apparel for those type of items. And back in 2019, they got a ransomware attack, and the hacker wanted $25 million for the decryption keys. So Board Riders had a cybersecurity insurance policy. They immediately contacted the claims department and put in a claim to get the money and help them with that process. So according to the article, it took about 8 months for the insurance company, Great American Insurance, to even issue a coverage position. So during this time, Board Riders basically is hoping the insurance company pays, and they're just now trying to go from their backups. So they eventually pay out $5.6 million for this claim. But the most interesting part about this, kind of what you were saying, Bryan, is now Board Riders is suing to say, look, we shouldn't have paid you that. We want to recoup the $5.6 million because we shouldn't have paid you that. So it's very, very. I'm kind of happy this is starting to happen, because now people aren't just gonna. I get it all the time. Well, I have cybersecurity insurance. Why do I need your service, your protection? And if more of these type of articles show up to say, look, just because you have cybersecurity insurance, A, you're not protected, and B, you're paying this policy for nothing, because when they investigate and see that you're not doing the proper things, they will find the reason to deny you.
Yep. Randy.
I mean, the days are gone when you're looking at cybersecurity insurance as your answer to ransomware.
Right.
And you have to think of it like if you had car insurance on your car, and then you found out from the mechanic that your transmission was hanging by half a bolt, and then you went out and drove down the freeway, and the transmission fell out, then caused a giant wreck. Your insurance company would be right to dispute that. And I'm not saying this insurance company is right, but I'm saying in the case of gross negligence, they're going to be right to dispute paying something that you knew you should have fixed that then caused a problem. And that's what we're getting with this ransomware stuff, is you can't just buy a policy and say, well, that's my ransomware. In fact, I filled out an application, at least for the cybersecurity questions, for a client last week, and they were asking for multi-factor authentication, privileged access to be monitored, processes. I mean, the things the insurance company were asking for, basically all of them are in our cybersecurity stack, but like that was unheard of even like a year ago to be asked all of these questions. But that's where it's going, and that's what you're going to have in place to say, I don't have gross negligence. I actually did my due diligence. So now I'm filing this claim. And so then, you have a higher chance of it getting paid. So
beautiful. I agree with all of that, what both of you gentlemen said. I just think that as you both were speaking, what kind of popped into my head was pretty simple, is that, and I think this is how it's going to play out. And I've been pretty accurate in my predictions in this industry. 2022 and 2023 are going to be a major year where business owners realize that they thought they were good and they got punched in the mouth twice because they thought they had a good IT company managing their stuff and they thought they had cyber insurance to back them up. And both of those things, and I think at a mass level, we're going to find a lot of companies get punched in the mouth and realize that those two things that they thought were good in their business are not good. There's a huge blind spot in a lot of businesses in the world where they think they have good cybersecurity protections and they think they're protected from their cyber insurance level. The reality of it is they probably don't have a good MSP managing their cybersecurity properly. And the reality of it is they probably filled out an insurance application completely wrong, and that will be used against them when it comes to filing a claim. And those two things are going to happen more and more to businesses, and business owners are going to wake up when either it happens to them or it happens to their best friend who happens to own a business too, and they heard about it, right? And then that's going to make them make a change. This change is going to happen organically through people getting punched in the mouth themselves and somebody really close to them getting punched in the mouth where they're like, I don't want that to happen to me. Right now, things are just not happening at the level where that's prevalent yet. But that's, I believe, with the increase in cyber attacks and everything I just said, 2022 and 2023 are going to be kind of like, I don't know, not to sound cocky, but the I told you so years for guys like us, right? So, don't want it to be that way. I wish people would, start doing the right things now. But I read more and more and more when you read things, companies just aren't doing enough, and we're still there. So let's jump into our final topic. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, guys, but I think it's important to point out that our friends at REvil have been taken offline. Let's talk about how they got taken offline and what this could possibly mean, and quickly get into what other ransomware groups. If you're not familiar with what Conti said, I can talk about it, but I'd like you guys to kind of share if you know what Conti said about the REvil going offline. I'd like to just kind of talk about that too. So, Andre, what do you know? Where'd REvil go? What happened?
Well, a lot of times in this show, we said, where's the U.S. government? How come the U.S. government isn't doing anything? And finally, we see they are. And more importantly, we see that they actually do have the skill set and the know-how to do it. So they essentially took down REvil servers. And this is a coordination between FBI, U.S. Cyber Command, Secret Service, and other like-minded countries.
Correct. Which is great, coming out of the ransomware summit that happened 2 weeks ago, where Washington invited countries to come in, and there were several countries who said they would step up and take the lead on this. But this effort has kind of shooken the cyber criminal community. Randy, do you know anything about the Conti? Shake your head, yes or no.
Not specifically to answer the question.
I'll just dive into it. Conti came out with a statement on the dark web, and I think it maybe made it up to the surface web. I know it definitely did on Twitter. But they basically are crying. They're literally crying, saying that this is unfair that the U.S. government is doing this to them, and that they are going to strike back even harder because the U.S. government has decided to use what they consider unsavory tactics to take REvil down. And they don't like it. And then Conti, mind you, Conti is the ransomware group that held the Ireland's national hospital system for hostage for, I think it was like well over 2 weeks. So this is the group that's complaining that the U.S. government is stepping over too far of the boundary, whatever boundary that is. Like, these ransomware groups and these cyber criminals kind of make up their own rules and their own boundaries. But that's what's going on. You have now all these cyber criminals are pissed off that REvil got taken out the way that they got taken out. Do you guys think that what's the reasoning behind this kind of reaction in your mind?
I would personally take it tongue in cheek, if you will, because in reality, like, this is like all other crime that's organized.
Right.
It's a cat and mouse game.
Right.
And if you hit them hard, you can even take the head and throw the head in jail and, put them in a Faraday cage. They can't communicate with the outside world. The rest of the organization is going to figure out a way to bubble to the top, and they're going to use other tactics. I mean, it's just a cat and mouse game. And so for them to come out and say, oh, you hit us so hard, it's probably an overstatement. So we might feel bad or give sympathy, but probably in reality, they knew it was coming, and, they've already got something else up their sleeve, or they're working on it.
Well, REvil might have known it was coming, but these other ransomware groups who are like, oh my God, if they could do the same thing to us. You're right. They can do the same thing to you. My perspective is I don't think that these these ransomware groups or these cyber criminals, I don't think they do a good job with cybersecurity themselves. They're not cyber experts. They're just dudes that know how to write code, that know how to deploy ransomware and get into networks. There's definitely an offense and defense, part of this game, right? And when you're doing the federal government, when they're taking out cyber criminals this way, that's offense. That's going on offense. The cyber criminals, when they deploy ransomware, that's them going on offense. They're going on offense. But if our FBI, CISA, and the rest of the world's, intelligence agencies are able to take these guys down so easily, I mean, they totally wipe them out. That just goes to show you the level of sophistication of their cyber defenses, which isn't very good. And that's kind of like what I want to leave the show with, is like, everybody needs to step up their game on defense. Our governments are the only ones who have the capability to play offense the right way. Everybody else's offensive efforts at the private level are Pop Warner compared to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers being your offense.
Right? And probably illegal.
Correct. So, the U.S. government is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I don't care if you're a Bucs fan or not. They're the best football team right now that I've seen. My Eagles suck. There's probably Pop Warner teams that could beat the Eagles right now. But that's like having Pop Warner as your offense. Like, no business should be worried about offense right now. Let the federal government take the offense and let them do it, right? Businesses need to be playing defense, and they need to shore up their defense. And I'm just going to say it, but defense wins championships. If the businesses want to win this war against cyber criminals, just have really good defense in place. You don't need to worry about offense. The government will handle the offense, but we're going to have to work together, government and business. Government's role in this is to be the offense. Business's role in this is to be the best defense you can possibly be, so we can stop these cyber attacks and make this way less lucrative than it is today. I mean, let's just put it this way. If you don't know how lucrative it is and how easy it is, I guarantee you I could train a 12-year-old in 6 months how to make millions of dollars exploiting companies. That's how easy it is right now. That's what I'm talking about, where like the defense is a joke right now. The defense is like the Philadelphia Eagles defense. It's a terrible defense, and that's what we're playing right now. So
I like to use the analogy of, if you had a car in a huge parking lot, your average criminal is just going to walk down the row and check to see if the car's locked. And what constituted, if we relate that to cybersecurity, what constituted a car being locked 5 years ago is different from what it was 2 years ago, is different from what it is now. But bottom line, if you put things in place that are layered, that are hurdles, that are a pain in the butt, you're gonna stop the overwhelming majority of this, because the next person over is easy pickings. So why waste? Why? I'm not saying it won't happen, but I'm just saying you're making the likelihood less, because they can just go to the next business that has nothing and get whatever they want, while still working on you. Like I said, it goes back to that whole zero trust thing of assuming that they're already in and setting up your defenses in such a way. It's funny because we've talked about, I guess it was about 2 or 3 months ago, we talked about the government making overtures that they wanted to be able to start hacking back, because, we know that if they're in your network, that's when they're most vulnerable. And this is great to see the government starting to hack back at this, and I don't know if laws passed or if things were signed or a little bit of all of the above or whatever, but it's great to see them, hacking back. So it's going to be interesting.
All right, Andre, bring us home.
Well, Randy gave the car analogy, and the first thing I can think about is, the analogy of the club. If you guys remember that on
the steering wheel, right?
So
right.
Those of you guys still listening that have the club in your steering wheel, there's a lot of ways that can now be deterred.
Right, and Randy, that was a genius analogy, in that the evolution of car security is we're going through the same process, right? We're going from, okay, we need to put locks in cars because cars are getting stolen or theft is happening, right? So cars started to be built with locks. And then it didn't take very long for somebody to figure out that I could just stick a hanger down the window and find the lever and pull and pop the lock, right? The chances are you're going to be hard pressed to find a vehicle manufactured today where you can pop the lock. All right, because it's all computers, it's all electronic. It works differently than a mechanical lock did in cars that were manufactured in the 80s and probably even the 90s, right? But the first car was invented in the turn of the century. So it took us almost 100 years to perfect the lock on the vehicle, which is a basic component of that thing's security. IT is way more complex. We're at the turn of the century when it comes to this stuff. So if anybody thinks that this problem is going to be solved in the next 2 or 3 years, I got a bridge in New York to sell you. So I just wanted to paint that picture. I wanted everybody to have this awareness, have this understanding of where we're at today and where we're going. Anything else you guys want to add?
Yeah, I got one more thing. You talked about year 22 and year 2023 of how this is going to be a major shift. But for the business owner, how much more is the threat going to be for you? Because now, if you're still not taking this seriously, you get hacked. Your cyber policy is not paying, and now it's your profits from last year, last quarter, that now has to pay this ransom. So it's no more. I got my policy; is going to take care of it. Now it's coming after your profits.
Oh, the days of ransomware being paid by insurance companies are coming to an end. I mean, that's already basically being written into the policies that they will protect you for everything else but the ransomware payment, right? So, be as it may, I think a lot of things are going to have to happen, but I think like if you're hanging your hat on the fact that, you're not going to be able to trade cryptocurrency to pay ransomware attacks, they're going to figure out another way to get their money, and they don't care when you get your data back. So if you got a FedEx dollar bills, that's what they're going to make you do until they get paid. It's just a reality. So. All right, boys, great show. Thank you for your insight. I think we knocked it out of the park again today with talking about stuff that just nobody's talking about, right? Nobody's talking about this stuff. And, if your IT guy or whoever's in charge of your security isn't saying this stuff to you at this level, at least this is a place for you as a business owner to come and get the real deal on what the world's like out there and why you really need to start looking at this and spending some brain power on investing in this and learning what the hell's going on and how this could potentially, reap its ugly head at your front door one day at your business when you're least expecting it. So good job, guys. See you on the next one.
All right. See
All
you
right.
tomorrow, Randy.
See you later. Yeah, see you tomorrow.